Imagine boarding a plane, ticket in hand, prepared for the comfort you paid for. Now imagine being told you can't sit where you belong, not because of a mistake, but because of the color of your skin. This is the story of Clara Jennings, a dignified, strong black woman, quietly powerful and rich in wisdom, who faced such humiliation aboard a flight on Aurora Skies Airlines. Denied her rightful first-class seat by a flight attendant whose judgment was clouded by bias. Clara chose not to react with anger, but with quiet resilience. But what happens when silent strength meets systemic injustice? How far can one woman's calm defiance go in a world too quick to judge and too slow to change? And who will stand with her when the skies become a battleground for dignity and respect? This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about courage, empathy, and the fight for justice that reaches far beyond any airplane cabin. If you want to hear how Clara's quiet power forced an airline to confront its demons and ultimately reclaim the sky for everyone, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let's dive in. The jet bridge smelled faintly of jet fuel and lemon disinfectant. Clara Jennings stepped forward with quiet grace, her black leather tote tucked over one arm, and a small purse resting in her left hand. She wore a navy blue blouse with gold buttons and a matching silk scarf around her neck. Her salt and pepper curls framed a face marked by time but undefeated by it. She didn't walk with a cane. She didn't walk with arrogance. She walked with the kind of poise that said, "I've weathered enough storms to know how to stand still." The boarding agent had barely looked up when he scanned her ticket. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," he muttered, distracted by the blinking light on his monitor. Clara nodded softly and stepped onto the plane. First class wasn't full, just 6 seats occupied, and hers 1A was in the far left corner beside the window. She always picked window seats. Something about watching clouds drift below her made her feel untouchable, like her late husband always said she deserved to feel. She reached the first row when a voice stopped her. Crisp, female, controlled. "Excuse me, ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Clara turned. The flight attendant wore a deep purple blazer with Aurora Skies Airlines stitched neatly across her name tag, Lauren Strickland. Her smile was polite, but not kind. Her eyes flitted quickly from Clara's face to her clothes, then to her skin. Clara handed over the pass without speaking. Lauren's eyes narrowed, and her forehead crinkled just slightly. This says first class. Row 1. Are you sure this is your seat?" Clara tilted her head ever so slightly. "Yes," she said calmly. "I believe so." Lauren glanced behind her, then leaned toward Clara just enough to lower her voice. "It's just, sometimes these tickets print wrong. Tech issue. I've had it happen before. Let me double check." She didn't wait for permission. She stepped past Clara, spoke briefly to another attendant near the galley, then tapped something on a handheld tablet. Clara remained where she stood. Passengers behind her were beginning to board. She heard the familiar shuffle of feet and carry-ons, the sighs of impatient travelers, the buzz of overhead compartments opening and closing. Lauren returned, tablet still in hand. "I think what happened is, you were upgraded, but the manifest didn't reflect it," she said, as if this were a reasonable answer. "We have a full first-class cabin today. I can reseat you further back until we sort it out. It won't be long." Clara looked at the woman's face for a long, still moment. "May I ask what seat you're reseating me in?" she asked softly. Lauren hesitated. "It would be 27F just for now. It's a window seat as well. 27F. Last row before the lavatory. Clara exhaled once, quietly. Her fingers clutched her tote just slightly tighter. She looked past Lauren, at row 1, seat A, empty, waiting. Passengers continued to board. A man in a business suit brushed past, taking seat 1C. He barely glanced at the two women. Lauren's smile was frozen now, tight at the edges. Clara took a single breath. "If there is a mistake in the system," she said with composure, "perhaps we should confirm it with the pilot or head attendant before moving me." Lauren's eyes flicked to the galley. She didn't respond. The silence stretched. Then a second voice spoke up, softer, a touch unsure. "Is everything all right here?" The speaker was Maya Chen, the lead flight attendant, short, mid-40s, with kind but tired eyes. Her uniform was pressed but less sharp than Lauren's. She'd been listening, but from a distance. Lauren spoke before Clara could answer. "Just clearing up a ticket issue. Passenger was assigned first class by mistake. Seems like a tech glitch. I'm reseating her in the back temporarily." Maya looked at Clara, then back at Lauren. "I see. Let me check the manifest," she said. But Lauren was already stepping aside, waving Clara down the aisle. "This way, ma'am." Clara's heart beat louder than she led on. She knew what this was. She'd known the moment the smile didn't reach Lauren's eyes. She could push back. She had every right. But the eyes on her back had started to grow. So instead, she nodded. She walked quietly down the aisle, past rows of curious glances, whispers tucked behind earbuds and magazines. As she reached row 27, a woman with two toddlers scrunched herself into her seat so Clara could squeeze past. Clara set her tote down, folded her hands in her lap, and exhaled. She didn't weep. She didn't rage. She sat still and let the seat hold her. Outside the window, the sun had begun to dip behind a bank of clouds. Clara watched it vanish, one soft layer at a time. 20 years ago, she would have spoken up. 10 years ago, her husband would have done it for her. But today, she chose something else. She chose to watch, to wait, and to remember. The quiet doesn't mean weakness, she thought. It's the sound just before the world shifts, and somewhere far away. A phone in her purse began to vibrate. The hum of the plane blended with the soft clicks of overhead bins shutting and passengers settling in. The air was sterile and thin, tinged with the scent of lavender from someone's travel pillow. Row 27 was not built for comfort. The legroom was tight, the window scratched, and Clara Jennings sat pressed against the wall, hands folded in her lap like a churchwoman at a funeral. Across the aisle, a toddler wailed in protest as her father tried to wrangle an iPad into working. Someone a few rows ahead already had their seat reclined. The flight hadn't even left the gate. Clara's mind drifted. She wasn't thinking about the discomfort, not about the noise, the squeeze, or even the indignity of being walked past her rightful seat like a trespasser. She was thinking about her late husband, Jeremiah. Thinking about the time they flew to Paris on their anniversary. The stewardess on that flight had brought Clara an extra blanket and called her darling. Jeremiah had made her laugh so hard she'd snorted red wine on her napkin. Her smile faded. The ache in her chest wasn't grief. It was something else, something more familiar. An old bruise pressed again. She'd been down this road before. Classrooms where her colleagues questioned her credentials. Boardrooms where her voice echoed into silence. Restaurants where the waiter asked if she was meeting someone instead of seating her at the white linen table she had reserved. It always started the same way. The pause, the scan, the soft smile followed by the doubt. This morning she had ironed her blouse and polished her shoes, not for show, but for pride. She didn't come looking for status. She came because she paid for it, just like anyone else, and still, it wasn't enough. Maya Chen walked slowly down the aisle toward her, a folded manifest in hand. Her expression wasn't quite shame, not yet, more like quiet uncertainty, the kind you wear when the truth scratches at the back of your mind, but you push it down to get through your shift. "Ms. Jennings," Maya said, her voice hushed as she crouched slightly in the narrow aisle. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Clara looked up. Her eyes were steady. "Of course." Maya lowered her voice even more. "I checked the system. Your seat assignment was correct. Row 1, seat A. There was no glitch, no upgrade. You purchased the ticket, full fare." Clara gave no reaction. She only nodded once. "I'm sorry," Maya added. There it was, the quiet apology, the whisper after the damage had been done. Clara studied the woman's face. She wasn't cruel, just compliant, and compliance, Clara had long known, could wound just as deeply as cruelty. "I appreciate you telling me," Clara said softly. Maya hesitated. "Would you like me to? I can speak with Lauren or the captain. We can reseat you in first class." Clara looked out the scratched window for a moment, then turned back. Her voice was calm but pointed. "No, thank you. I prefer not to be seated where I am merely tolerated." Maya swallowed, guilt settling over her like frost. "I understand." Clara doubted that she truly did, but she appreciated the effort. The flight continued boarding. More faces passed, more glances cast toward Clara, a few curious, some indifferent, one or two with a flicker of recognition. None stopped, none spoke. In row 3, a young man in a charcoal hoodie shifted in his seat, eyebrows drawn together as he observed the exchange. His name was Caleb Monroe, and, until that moment, he'd been watching the boarding process with the indifference of a frequent flyer. But now his body had stiffened. Eyes locked on Clara. Caleb had grown up in 17 foster homes across 3 states. He had learned to spot injustice before it turned into harm. He had learned when to duck, when to push back, and when to stay silent. But something about Clara made him pause. Not just the way she sat, perfectly composed in a seat she didn't belong in, not just the way her jaw stayed still while her eyes spoke volumes. It was the weight of dignity, resting like a crown on someone who had been told they had no throne. He kept watching. At the front of the cabin, Lauren busied herself with safety checks, but her gaze occasionally flicked down the aisle, toward 27F. Her jaw was set tight, her lips pressed together. She had not expected Maya to check the manifest. She had not expected the woman to still be on the plane. She had assumed, like many before her, that quiet meant compliant, that dignity meant weakness, that older meant harmless. Lauren didn't know yet what she had set in motion. Back in row 27, Clara opened her tote bag and pulled out her phone. She typed a short message, nothing dramatic, just a sentence, sent to someone who owed her a favor, a very large one. Then she turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on her tray. The plane door closed. The captain's voice came through the intercom, chipper and warm. "Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're just about ready for takeoff, en route to Boston. Should be a smooth flight today." Caleb's eyes hadn't left Clara. He leaned to his left, whispering to the man seated beside him. "Did you see what happened just now?" The man blinked. "What, that lady in the back? She was supposed to be in first. They moved her for no reason." The man shrugged. "Maybe she didn't have the right ticket." Caleb leaned back. Typical answer. Typical shrug. The plane rolled toward the runway. Lauren walked down the aisle, doing final seatbelt checks. When she reached 27F, her eyes briefly met Clara's. Clara smiled. Not with sweetness, not with warmth. It was the kind of smile you give someone right before the tide turns. Lauren turned away quickly, her pulse rising. A quiet voice echoed in Clara's memory. Her husband's voice. "You don't always have to roar to be heard. Sometimes the silence speaks loudest of all." As the plane lifted into the sky, Clara leaned back in her seat. Her scarf fluttered lightly with the shift in pressure. She looked out the window, at the clouds pulling apart like gauze. Let them think it was over. The sky still had chapters to write. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a faint chime, and passengers reached for their trays, earbuds, and magazines. The hum of engines now blended with soft conversations, the occasional laugh, and the clinking of soda cans from the beverage cart. But for Caleb Monroe, the noise faded into the background. He sat still in 2B, elbows resting on the armrests, eyes unfocused as he stared down the aisle. Clara Jennings. He hadn't even known her name yet, but something about her stayed with him. The moment she was told to move, the grace with which she obeyed, the way the flight attendant's eyes flickered with something unsaid, he knew that look. He had seen it pointed at himself too many times in too many waiting rooms and job interviews and school meetings. The moment people scanned his skin, his clothes, and made a quiet judgment. She had been removed for one reason, and everyone on board knew it, even if they wouldn't say it out loud. Caleb looked down at his phone. His thumbs hovered over the screen, unsure what to do with the fire building in his chest. The boy next to him, probably a college student, was fast asleep with his hoodie pulled over his head and a playlist humming in his ears. Caleb turned toward the aisle and pressed the call button. A few moments later, Maya Chen appeared. Her smile was automatic, but her eyes still carried the weight of the earlier encounter. "Yes, sir." Caleb lowered his voice. "I have a question." She leaned in. "The lady in 27F. What happened to her seat?" Maya stiffened. "I'm not sure I can discuss another passenger's situation." "Sir?" Caleb nodded once. "I understand. Let me ask it another way. If someone purchased a first-class seat and was removed without cause, would that be considered standard?" Her eyes flickered. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I'm not trying to get you in trouble," Caleb added gently, "but you saw what happened, and I think you know it wasn't right." Maya sighed. "No, it wasn't." Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. "Thank you for saying that." Maya hesitated. "You know, I wanted to stop it. I really did. But things like this, they happen fast, and people like Lauren, well, they know how to make it seem like it's protocol." Caleb studied her. "You're the lead flight attendant, right?" She nodded. "Then you have more power than you think." That sentence sat between them like a challenge. "I'll keep that in mind," Maya said softly before walking away. Caleb leaned back in his seat and stared at the overhead light. He could have let it go. He could have put his headphones in, watched the in-flight movie, and made it to Boston with nothing more than an ache in his gut. But that ache had a name now. Clara. In row 27, Clara Jennings sat with her eyes closed, not asleep, just still. She had not touched the drink the attendant had offered. She had not opened a book or a magazine. She just breathed, slow and steady, like someone practicing how to stay whole in a place that had tried to unmake her. A young mother in the adjacent seat glanced at her and offered a shy smile. Clara returned it with warmth, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered her father's voice, proud and firm. He used to say, "When you walk into a room, bring your whole self, even if they try to send it out the back door." She had built a life on that principle. She'd been the first black teacher in a wealthy private school in Virginia. She had taught children who had never seen someone like her at the front of a classroom. She had earned respect through grace and steel. Later, she and Jeremiah had taken their savings and quietly invested in small companies, one of which had become very large. She never wore her wealth, never needed to. But today, someone had looked at her and decided she didn't belong. Again. Clara's eyes opened slowly. The seatbelt sign lit back up. The captain announced a slight turbulence ahead. Outside, the clouds shifted into soft gray canopies. Light streamed through, broken into fractured rays. At the front of the plane, Lauren poured a glass of club soda and stirred it with unnecessary force. Her hands trembled slightly, though she hid it well. The look on Clara's face when she walked away, that smile still echoed in her mind. Lauren hadn't expected her to stay calm. She'd expected a complaint, maybe a confrontation, something loud, something easy to label as difficult. But Clara had given her none of that. She had made her look small without a word. Lauren hated how it made her feel. Maya approached the galley. Lauren straightened. "Everything all right?" Lauren asked. Maya's voice was cool. "Depends what you mean by all right." Lauren narrowed her eyes, meaning Maya lowered her voice. The passenger in 2B saw what happened. He asked questions. Lauren rolled her eyes. People ask questions. Doesn't mean they understand how these things work. Maya tilted her head. "Do you?" The silence that followed was sharp. "I've worked with you a long time." "Lauren," Maya said quietly, "but today you crossed a line." Lauren turned away. "I followed protocol." "No," Maya said. "You followed your bias." Lauren's jaw clenched. "Be careful, Maya." But Maya just walked away. Back in 2B. Caleb stared at his reflection in the small screen in front of him. His fingers hovered over the call button again. He had half a mind to write a tweet, maybe even record a video, but something held him back. It wasn't time for noise. It was time for clarity. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn notebook. Inside were ideas he'd scribbled for a nonprofit he'd wanted to start for years. Something about dignity, about presence, about legacy. Clara Jennings didn't know it yet, but she had just become the inspiration for its name. As the plane sailed through the sky, somewhere between indignity and revelation, Clara turned her phone back on. A single reply had arrived. It read only 3 words. "We're already watching." The clink of ice and plastic cups echoed softly through the cabin as drink service continued. A faint smell of pretzels mixed with citrus hand sanitizer drifted through the air. The lights had dimmed slightly, casting a subdued glow over the plane. Clara Jennings remained still in her seat, her posture regal despite the narrow frame of row 27. Her hands rested gently on her lap. She watched the clouds pass beyond the window. a calm canvas that hid the storm quietly swirling inside her. She had not looked at her phone again. The 3-word message she had received earlier, "We're already watching," still echoed in her thoughts like a heartbeat. Steady, measured, powerful. Further up the plane, just behind the curtain dividing business and first class. Caleb Monroe leaned forward in his seat. He had not yet returned to his notebook. His mind was on Clara, on the moment Lauren blocked her path, on how easily it had all happened without a single raised voice. That was the thing about prejudice. It didn't need shouting. It could speak in gentle tones, carry a smile, and still carve deep wounds. His gaze shifted as someone else entered the scene, a man in a tailored gray suit with polished Italian shoes and a wristwatch that gleamed even in the dim cabin light. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and the expression on his face carried an air of entitled confidence. Dr. Thomas Ellery. Caleb had seen his name on the priority boarding screen. Something about his presence announced itself, even when he said nothing. He had a politician's smile and a surgeon's precision. Ellery was seated in 1C, but, at the moment, he stood just behind Maya Chen as she leaned over to adjust a tray table. His voice came soft but sharp. "Miss, is there a reason we have disruption so early in the flight?" Maya turned, unsure what he was referring to. Ellery gestured subtly toward the back. "I heard something about a seat confusion. A woman, claiming first-class Maya, kept her face neutral." "Yes, sir. A misunderstanding with the manifest. It's been resolved." Ellery chuckled without humor. Must have been quite the upgrade. Can't imagine a woman like that affording row 1. Maya's breath caught in her chest. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it, as if Clara's presence had violated some unspoken rule of who should be seen and where. She replied evenly. She was a full-fare first-class passenger. "Sir?" Ellery raised an eyebrow. "Really interesting. Doesn't quite fit the usual profile." Maya didn't respond, but her jaw tightened. Lauren, who had been nearby arranging a tray, smirked subtly. "Some people buy the seat, but not the part that fits with it." Maya turned to Lauren, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Enough." But Ellery had already turned back to his seat, clearly satisfied with his commentary. Caleb heard it all. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the tone, the arrogance, the deliberate phrasing, it wasn't meant to be private. It was meant to land, to linger, to remind. Clara wasn't even near enough to hear it, but Caleb had, and that was enough. He reached into the seat pocket in front of him and pulled out the airline's in-flight magazine. On the front cover was a smiling photo of Aurora Skies Airlines' CEO shaking hands with a community leader at a scholarship award event. The headline read, "Equality Takes Flight." Caleb nearly laughed. The pages flipped in his hands without focus. His thoughts returned to Clara, to the quiet battle she was fighting while the rest of the cabin kept pretending nothing had happened. Back in the galley, Lauren leaned on the counter, sipping a Diet Cola. Maya approached her again. "Don't do that again," Maya said plainly. Lauren didn't look at her. "Do what that comment? The one about her not fitting the profile?" Lauren rolled her eyes. "Come on, Maya. Don't get so sensitive. You know I didn't mean anything. You meant exactly what you said." Lauren shrugged. "Whatever. She's not in first, is she? Maybe she should take the hint." Maya felt something sharp rise in her chest, a feeling she usually kept buried under professionalism and neutrality. But it rose anyway. "You ever wonder why people like Clara don't raise their voices?" Maya said. because they're too busy holding their dignity in place, even when people like you try to knock it down. Lauren turned, the smugness in her expression faltering. You're being dramatic. No, Maya said. I'm being honest. The silence between them was louder than any argument. In the back, Clara had finally closed her eyes, though not in rest. Her thoughts moved quietly through the corridors of memory. She remembered the board meeting where she was asked if she was the assistant. She remembered the hotel where the front desk clerk assumed she was a housekeeper. She remembered the whisper in a charity gala where someone said, "Oh, she must be married to someone important," as if her presence needed to be explained. She had let most of it go, not because she was weak, but because she had built a life in spite of it. But today, something felt different. Perhaps it was her age, or the fact that Jeremiah wasn't there to hold her hand. Or maybe it was that she had simply grown tired of paying full price for half the dignity. In first class. Dr. Ellery sipped champagne and laughed at something on his phone. In row 2, Caleb reached for his notebook again and scribbled a single word across the top of a clean page. Legacy, and somewhere, far above the clouds, a message was already being typed on a phone in a private office, the recipient Aurora Skies Airlines Senior Corporate Counsel. The subject line, urgent incident on flight AS-417. The cabin lights dimmed further as the aircraft reached cruising altitude. A faint hum filled the air, the kind that always accompanied long flights, like a whisper reminding you that you were suspended between two worlds. Outside, the sky stretched wide and weightless, but inside, Clara Jennings sat in seat 27F earthbound in spirit, despite the miles of sky beneath her. She had barely moved since takeoff. Only her fingers had stirred, gently twisting her wedding band around her finger, the way she always did when trying to quiet a gathering storm inside her. The bracelet on her wrist, a simple gold chain with a charm shaped like a book, clicked softly against the metal zipper of her bag. It had been a gift from one of her former students. She remembered his face clearly even after all these years. Wide smile, curious eyes. He had called her Miss J and once said, "You don't just teach, you listen." She thought of that boy now, and the many others like him, the ones she had encouraged to speak up, to stand tall, to push back with poise when the world tried to tell them no. And yet here she was, quiet, shrinking, or so it appeared. Maya passed by with the drink cart, her expression composed but eyes heavy. When she reached Clara, she paused. "Would you care for something to drink? Ms. Jennings?" Clara looked up. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Water, please." Maya poured a bottle into a plastic cup and handed it over. Their eyes met for a moment longer than usual. "I just wanted to say," Maya began quietly, "that you didn't deserve what happened. Not any part of it." Clara nodded once. "I know." Maya swallowed. "If I had stepped in sooner." "You were watching," Clara said softly. Sometimes that's the first step toward change. There was something in Maya's eyes then, a mix of relief and shame. Clara had seen it before. The realization that silence, even well-intentioned, can bruise. "I'll do better," Maya whispered. "I believe you," Clara replied. Maya smiled faintly and moved on. The woman next to Clara, a young mother with a baby curled against her chest, looked over. "Was that about earlier?" she asked. Clara turned to her, not unkindly. "Yes." The woman hesitated. "I didn't say anything. I should have." Clara's expression softened. "It's never too late to learn. That was the truth of it. Not everyone had to be a hero in the moment, but what they did after, how they grew, how they changed, that mattered. A bump of turbulence jolted the cabin. The baby stirred, fussing briefly. Clara instinctively reached for the toy that had rolled toward her feet and handed it back to the mother. "Thank you," the woman said, surprised. Clara nodded, then turned again toward the window. The clouds were thicker now, layered like folds of wool. The sun was nearly gone, casting a pale lavender hue over the horizon. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a folded note written in her husband's handwriting, old but not faded. She opened it slowly and read the words she already knew by heart. "You walk into rooms like they belong to you because they always did. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her throat tightened. Her eyes glistened. She had taught classrooms, mentored leaders, sat on boards, helped launch companies, and still, she had been made to feel like a stranger in a space she had paid to enter. Was it the seat that hurt the most, or the knowing glance from that woman who thought she could move Clara without consequence? Maybe it was both. Maybe it was the memory of every time she had been overlooked, underestimated, silenced. She looked at the screen in front of her. The flight map showed they were halfway to Boston. She picked up her phone and opened her email, drafted a short note. Subject review of passenger conduct. Flight AS-4117 body confirmed incident involving discriminatory reassignment of a first-class seat. Please escalate per standing protocol. I'll handle public response upon landing. She paused before hitting send. Her thumb hovered, her thoughts momentarily clouded with doubt. Should she? Would it matter? Would it make a difference this time? The memory of Lauren's face came back to her. The smirk, the entitlement, the assumption. Yes, it mattered. She pressed send. In row 2, Caleb Monroe leaned over to his seatmate, now awake and watching a movie, and said, "Excuse me," before stepping into the aisle. He made his way quietly down the plane, stopping just short of row 27. "Ms. Jennings," he said gently. Clara looked up, surprised. "Yes, my name is Caleb Monroe. I saw what happened earlier. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry, and I admire how you handled it." Clara regarded him carefully. "You don't need to apologize for what someone else did, I know. But silence is participation, right? I don't want to be part of that." She nodded slowly. "Then you're already doing better than most." He smiled. "May I ask, did you always know how to stay so calm?" Clara gave a quiet laugh. "No, but I had to learn. The world doesn't always listen to women like me when we raise our voices. So I made sure it would hear me when I didn't." Caleb stood quietly for a moment, then reached into his pocket and handed her a card. "I'm starting a foundation for dignity in public spaces. Would you let me name it after you?" Clara blinked, stunned. "I don't need your permission," he said quickly, "but I'd be honored to have your blessing." She looked at the card, his name, his email, the foundation name scribbled in the corner, the Jennings Initiative. She smiled, a real smile this time. I would be honored. Caleb returned to his seat. Outside, the plane sailed forward into the oncoming dusk, and behind the quiet surface of the flight, systems had already begun to stir. The message Clara sent had reached a chain of people who recognized her name not just with familiarity, but with urgency. She wasn't just another passenger. She had helped fund Aurora Skies Airlines in its infancy. Silent partner, anonymous donor, strategist behind its earliest safety protocols. They thought she had sold her stake, and she had, until recently. As the aircraft glided through the sky, Clara leaned her head back and whispered to herself, "Not anymore." The cabin had grown quieter as night fell outside the aircraft. The soft glow of reading lights sprinkled across the ceiling like distant stars. Passengers settled into their movies, their books, their daydreams, unaware of the quiet reckoning traveling among them at 35,000 feet. In row 27, Clara Jennings sat with her hands gently folded in her lap. Her water cup was empty, her tray table up. The storm that had swirled beneath her calm surface had narrowed into something sharper now. She wasn't angry. She was awake. She had pressed send on her message an hour ago. It was no longer in her hands, and yet everything still was. Up front. In row 2, Caleb Monroe sat with a notebook open on his tray table. He wasn't writing. He was thinking. Reflecting. His earlier conversation with Clara hadn't left him. Her grace had stunned him, but beneath it, he'd sensed something stirring a quiet fire that had chosen not to burn yet. He reached again for the call button. Maya appeared quickly, her face unreadable but her presence softer now. "Can I help you?" Caleb kept his voice low. "I need to speak with the captain, or the highest-ranking crew member, privately, if possible." Maya blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "May I ask why it concerns the treatment of a passenger and the legal consequences if this becomes public?" Maya stared at him. "I'm not threatening you," Caleb added, "but you know as well as I do what just happened back there, and the world's not as quiet about it as it used to be." She hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. "Give me a few minutes." As Maya disappeared into the cockpit area, Lauren Strickland watched from her post near first class. Her arms were crossed, her foot tapping a silent rhythm on the floor. She hadn't seen Clara since the incident, but the ripples were making their way forward, and she could feel them. The way Maya had distanced herself, the look on that young man's face. Even Dr. Ellery had gone unusually silent, glancing at her only once with mild disapproval, as if to say, "Fix this before it touches me." She shifted uncomfortably. Back in row 27, Clara's phone vibrated. A single line appeared, verified, preparing interim protocol. She read it twice, then slipped the phone back into her bag at the front of the aircraft. Maya reemerged and motioned discreetly for Caleb to follow her. She led him into the small service galley, dimly lit, surrounded by metal drawers and folded blankets, a place never meant for deep conversations, but tonight it became something else. "I spoke to the captain," Maya said. "He can't leave the cockpit, but I'll listen and report. You have my word." Caleb nodded. This is going to sound unbelievable, but the woman in 27F Clara Jennings was displaced from her first-class seat without cause. That in itself is enough for a discrimination lawsuit. Maya didn't speak, she just listened. But there's more. He said, "She's not just a passenger. She's someone important. I don't know all the details, but she's connected, quietly. She sent a message earlier, and I'm willing to bet that before we land, you're going to get a call you weren't expecting." Maya frowned. "You think she's a public figure?" "No," Caleb said. "I think she's someone who never wanted attention until today." Maya crossed her arms. Lauren didn't know who she was. She didn't care who she was, Caleb corrected. That's the problem. Maya looked down. Her silence was enough. She needs to be reseated, Caleb said gently. That would be a start. Maya took a breath. Let me try, but it's going to rattle some egos. Caleb stepped out of the galley, heart pounding not from fear, but from the rare feeling of having done something meaningful. Maya stood still a moment longer, then walked the narrow aisle toward first class. She found Lauren reviewing the meal trays for the next service. I need to reseat someone in row 1, Maya said. Lauren looked up, confused. Who, Ms. Jennings? Lauren froze. Excuse me, you heard me, Maya said, her voice low. She's being reseated. We'll move the standby executive to the business row. He's not confirmed. She is. Lauren's mouth opened, but no words came. She blinked twice. This isn't a suggestion, Maya added. Lauren scoffed. And what changed all of a sudden? Everything, Maya replied. Back in row 27, Clara watched Maya approach. The passengers around her looked up curiously. Ms. Jennings, Maya said with a calm, clear voice. We'd like to welcome you to your original seat. Would you mind following me? Clara studied her carefully. She saw the resolve behind Maya's words. Of course, Clara replied, rising smoothly. She gathered her bag, thanked the mother beside her, and walked the long aisle not with pride, not with vengeance, but with purpose. As she stepped into the first-class cabin, some passengers turned to watch. A few looked away. Others studied her with quiet curiosity. She passed Lauren without a glance. Seat 1A waited. The seat that should have been hers all along. Clara placed her tote beside her, folded her hands in her lap once more, and closed her eyes. Not to rest, to center herself, to listen. Outside the window, the clouds had broken. The stars shimmered faintly in the distance, silent witnesses to a quiet correction. In the galley, Lauren stared at the service cart without seeing it. The knot in her stomach twisted tighter. She didn't know who Clara Jennings was, but she knew now that she was someone she should not have underestimated. In the cockpit, a notification pinged. The captain read the message once, then twice. He looked at his co-pilot. We're being asked to prepare for an internal crew audit upon landing, he said slowly. The co-pilot raised an eyebrow. That's new. The captain nodded. Very, and at the center of it all. Clara sat with her wedding band resting still against her skin, and a quiet truth growing larger by the minute. Dignity, she thought, isn't something they give you. It's something they can't take away. The aircraft cruised steadily at 34,000 feet, slicing through pockets of moonlight and shadow. The air was calm outside, but inside Aurora Skies Flight AS-4017 the turbulence was about to begin. Clara Jennings sat in Seat 1A. Her eyes closed, her breath slow and steady. She wasn't resting, she was listening, feeling, measuring the way the energy had shifted since her return to first class. She felt it in the way Lauren avoided eye contact as she passed by with the linen-draped service cart. She heard it in the hushed tones of the passengers around her, their conversations thick with curiosity, coated in caution, and she sensed it in Maya's footsteps, no longer hesitant, now purposeful as she moved through the cabin with renewed direction. The seat was comfortable, yes, but the comfort came not from the leather cushion or the extra leg room. It came from something much deeper. It came from being restored, not gifted, not permitted, restored. Caleb Monroe leaned his head back in row 2, listening to the ambient hum of the engine and the whisper of retribution moving through the aisles like a current. He didn't need to see Clara to know she was exactly where she was supposed to be. He'd watched the exchange from a distance, watched her walk back to first class without a word. It hadn't been a victory march. It had been something more powerful, a reclamation, not just of a seat, but of space, of presence. Up in the cockpit, Captain Reyes read over the most recent update on the secure crew messaging tablet. It read, "Confirmed audit order, discretion requested, compliance mandatory, contact HQ upon landing." He tapped the message twice to acknowledge receipt, then exhaled slowly. He'd been with Aurora Skies for over 18 years, piloted through storms, emergencies, software failures, but this was different. He turned to his co-pilot, First Officer Sayer, and said, "We're not dealing with a weather diversion, but a personnel-level intervention, quiet, internal, but serious." Sayer raised an eyebrow. "What's the context?" Reyes lowered his voice. "Passenger mistreatment, discrimination allegation, and apparently, the passenger involved has serious leverage." Sayer nodded slowly. "We've never had a mid-air audit request before." "Exactly," Reyes replied, "which tells you who we're dealing with." Meanwhile, in the forward galley, Lauren stood rigid as Maya quietly approached. "We just received word from the captain," Maya said evenly. "There's an internal crew audit waiting for us upon landing." Lauren blinked. "An audit? What are you talking about? Corporates involved? Legal team too? Everything that happened on this flight, especially during boarding, is now being reviewed." Lauren scoffed lightly, a defensive laugh trying to mask unease. "That's not real. There's no way a complaint moves that fast." Maya stared at her. "It does when the person on the receiving end helped build this company." Lauren froze. What Maya leaned in. Clara Jennings wasn't just a passenger. She was an early silent investor. She helped write our original employee conduct policy. You know that framed document hanging in the break room? She helped design that. Lauren's face drained of color. "She's a ghost in our foundation," Maya continued. "And today, she decided to stop being silent." The words sank in like cold water. Lauren tried to recover. "Even if that's true, I didn't know who she was." "That's the point," Maya said. "You didn't think you needed to know. You looked at her and made a decision based on something other than fact. Now that choice is flying ahead of us and landing with force." For the first time all flight, Lauren said nothing. Back in 1A, Clara watched Maya return and quietly kneel beside her. "I wanted you to know," Maya said softly. "The company is responding. Captain received audit instructions mid-air. The crew will be reviewed. Actions will be documented." Clara didn't move. Her voice remained soft. "I'm not seeking punishment. I'm seeking recognition and correction. You'll have both," Maya said. "I promise." Clara gave the faintest nod. Across the aisle, Dr. Thomas Ellery stirred in his seat. He'd been listening, watching. Though his face remained calm, a flicker of unease crossed it when Clara turned her gaze to him. Just for a moment. He shifted in his seat and pulled out his tablet, pretending to read. The unease wasn't guilt, it was fear. The kind that takes hold when a system begins to turn against the very people it once favored. Clara turned back to her window. The sky outside was deep ink blue, stars scattered like shattered glass, the world below invisible. But up here, she could see everything with new clarity. It had taken just one moment of disrespect, one false smile, one subtle theft of space, And now, everything had changed. She reached into her bag and pulled out a journal. On the first page, she wrote a single line in elegant cursive. Change doesn't always come roaring. Sometimes it arrives seat by seat. As the cabin lights dimmed further and passengers prepared for rest, Clara remained upright, eyes open, watching the horizon shift. Back in the galley, Lauren tried to make sense of her mistake. She thought about the smirk she gave when Clara handed over the ticket, the clipped tone, the decision made in the span of seconds. She hadn't thought it mattered. Now it mattered more than anything. And, as the plane pressed forward into the night sky, the balance of power tilted quietly, steadily, from prejudice to accountability. The aircraft floated through a pocket of silence, somewhere above Ohio, its cabin dim and filled with the soft rhythm of sleep. Screens glowed faintly, seat belts were snug across slumped shoulders, and the gentle hum of engines created a lullaby that calmed most passengers into quiet submission. But for Clara Jennings, sleep was not what she came for. She sat upright in seat 1A, a shawl wrapped gently over her shoulders. Her hands rested in her lap, one thumb rhythmically rubbing the edge of her wedding band. She wasn't praying, but there was something reverent in the way she held herself, something still and unshakable. The hush in the cabin wasn't just fatigue, it was a pause, a waiting, a breath taken before the storm arrives, from behind the curtain. Maya Chen stepped into first class again. She was quieter now, more composed, though a weight lingered in her eyes. She approached Clara's seat, leaned down slightly, and whispered, "The captain just received another message. Corporate wants to speak with you the moment we land." Clara nodded. Expected. They've already suspended 2 scheduled internal trainings to prioritize the review. HR, PR, and executive operations will be present. Maya paused. They're taking this seriously. Clara gave her a long look, as they should. Maya hesitated again, then asked, "Do you want to give a statement when we land, or wait for legal counsel? I'll speak." Clara said, "But not for the lawyers, for the culture. The company forgot its roots. I helped build those roots. Now I intend to water them." Maya's throat tightened. "We're lucky to have you," she said quietly. Clara smiled softly. "You're not lucky. You're overdue." As Maya moved away, passengers stirred gently in their seats. Some turned over. Some blinked against the screen glow, but no one spoke. It was as if the entire aircraft could feel the shift, the altitude of something greater than flight itself. In row 2, Caleb Monroe sat awake, staring straight ahead. He had not slept. He couldn't. Something about what was happening on this flight had begun to rewrite something inside him. A buried frustration was finally finding structure. Not just anger, but direction. He looked down at his notebook again. The word Jennings sat at the top of the page. Beneath it, he began writing in slow, careful print. "We need to build a system that doesn't wait for injustice to be called out. We need a system that prevents it in the first place." Her silence changed more than protest ever could. He paused, then underlined the last sentence. Further up, in the cockpit. Captain Reyes reviewed a third encrypted message that had just arrived. This one wasn't from operations. It was from someone above that. It read, "Command from Executive Chair. Do not allow crew member Strickland to deplane with public passengers. Hold for formal conversation before release. Reyes looked over at his co-pilot, who raised his eyebrows but said nothing. "What kind of passenger triggers this kind of command?" Sayer asked. Reyes shook his head slowly. "Not the kind you disrespect without knowing exactly who she is." Back in the galley, Lauren Strickland rinsed a glass under the tap. Her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't the turbulence. It was something colder. Every time she tried to tell herself this would pass, a new wave of anxiety crept over her. She had made a mistake, not just with the seat, with the assumption, the judgment, the smirk. She could still hear Maya's voice echoing. You looked at her and made a decision based on something other than fact. Lauren dried the glass and stacked it among the others, but the weight in her chest didn't lighten. Dr. Thomas Ellery, seated across the aisle from Clara, hadn't spoken since meal service. He occasionally glanced over, feigning disinterest, but there was a visible tightness in his jaw now, a subtle shift in his posture. He had heard the whispers, too, and he knew enough about corporate power to recognize the moment someone above your pay grade stepped in. Clara sat still, hands folded. Her scarf was now draped lightly across her shoulders, the fabric catching the faint cabin light like a halo. A passenger from row 3 walked forward quietly and paused near her seat. He was tall, late 30s, with kind eyes. He leaned down slightly and whispered, "I saw what happened when you boarded. I didn't say anything." Clara looked at him. "I should have," he added. She studied his face. "And now I'm learning," he said simply. Clara gave a gentle nod. "Then carry it with you." He stepped back quietly, a little taller somehow, and returned to his seat. Maya watched the moment from the side, quietly moved. It wasn't just Clara's presence. It was the effect she had without demanding it. When she walked through the world, people didn't just observe her, they remembered her. That was the kind of influence few people ever earned. And now it was lighting a path across an entire airline. In row 1, Clara finally pulled out a pen. Not a phone, not a tablet, a fountain pen, heavy and elegant. She flipped to the last page of her journal and began to write. "I'm not here to destroy. I'm here to remind." This airline was built on the promise of progress, of inclusion, of being first in the sky and first in conscience. Somewhere along the way, they forgot. That is why I came back. Not to punish, but to return the soul to what we built. They need to remember who they serve. She capped the pen and closed the book. Outside, the clouds began to thin. City lights sparkled faintly below like constellations reversed. Boston was approaching, and with it, a reckoning. The wheels touched down with a soft thud. The cabin trembled as the aircraft slowed, the brakes humming gently beneath the floorboards. Outside the window, the Boston skyline shimmered beneath a pale sunrise, buildings rimmed in gold light, a city slowly waking to an ordinary day, but inside the aircraft, nothing felt ordinary. Seatbelt signs blinked off, passengers stirred, seatbacks shifted upright, whispers flowed through the cabin, layered with yawns and stretches. To most, it was the end of another flight. To Clara Jennings, it was the beginning of something much larger. She remained seated in 1A, still and composed, her tote at her feet and her scarf neatly folded in her lap. Her phone had buzzed once shortly after landing. A message from her legal team, reception confirmed, ground team ready. She tucked it away. In the galley, Maya Chen stood near the front door, headset on, listening to instructions. Her face remained calm, but her eyes were wide with awareness. She knew this wasn't going to be a routine deplaning. Captain Reyes stepped out from the cockpit, smoothing his tie and glancing around the cabin. His face carried the weary focus of someone about to walk into a room full of consequences. Lauren stood across from him, arms stiff at her sides, lips slightly parted. She'd asked 3 times what was going to happen. No one had answered. A voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boston Logan International Airport. We ask that you please remain seated while we coordinate a brief crew verification before disembarkation. Thank you for your patience." The message was calm, almost vague, but the tension it created was undeniable. Caleb Monroe shifted forward in his seat, eyes sharp. He saw the expressions begin to change: curiosity, confusion, a subtle rise of unease. He had seen it before in corporate boardrooms and courtrooms when people realized something serious was unfolding, and they weren't in control of it. Passengers began whispering. Did something happen? Why can't we get off yet? Is this about that lady in first class? Clara sat like a lighthouse in the fog, still, bright, unmoving. Then she stood. She reached into her tote, pulled out a single folded page, and waited. Maya approached her gently. "They're ready for you," she said. Clara nodded and walked forward with Maya by her side. As she stepped off the aircraft and into the jet bridge, she was greeted by a small group of individuals wearing suits and earpieces. Behind them, an Aurora Skies regional director, red-eyed and pale, nodded in silent greeting. "Ms. Jennings," he said, "we're deeply sorry for the events that occurred aboard your flight. Please allow us to—" Clara held up a hand. "Not rude, just clear. I'll speak for myself," she said. The group parted to let her through. Inside the private terminal lounge, a press representative stood behind a row of microphones. A handful of media outlets had already arrived. Nothing large, but enough to make the moment real. Clara stepped forward. She didn't rush, didn't read. She simply unfolded the page she had carried and glanced down once before beginning. "I was removed from my rightful seat in first class yesterday. Not because of a mechanical error, not because of a computer glitch, but because someone decided that I didn't look like I belonged there." She looked up. "My name is Clara Jennings. I'm a former educator, a widow, and a silent founding investor in Aurora Skies Airlines. I helped design the code of conduct that this airline pledged to uphold." A murmur rose in the back of the room. "I did not file a lawsuit today. I did not demand compensation. What I demand is something much harder. I demand reflection." She paused. Let the words land. "I have sat quietly for too long while watching people like me be treated like shadows in spaces we've earned the right to occupy. My silence ends today." Behind her, Maya lowered her head, tears pricking at the edges of her eyes. "I don't want an apology printed on letterhead." Clara continued. "I don't want a statement signed by public relations. I want change written into policy. I want every staff member trained to see the human being before the assumption. I want children, elders, workers, dreamers, every person on every flight to be treated not with tolerance, but with respect." A cameraman adjusted focus. A reporter wrote quickly, "I am not here as a victim. I am here as a reminder that dignity cannot be revoked, that grace under fire is not weakness, that the sky belongs to all of us." She stepped back. No applause followed, no music, just a heavy silence that settled deep in every chest. A silence of reckoning. An Aurora Skies executive moved to the podium. Ms. Jennings, on behalf of... She turned to him. I believe there's still someone who hasn't been addressed. The executive blinked. You'll find her still on board, Clara added. Lauren, back in the cabin. Lauren remained frozen in the galley. 2 uniformed officials had boarded minutes ago. They didn't cuff her, didn't raise voices. They simply asked her to remain where she was until internal compliance representatives arrived. She knew what was happening. She had known the moment Clara walked past her without speaking. But what crushed her wasn't the impending suspension or investigation. It was the look Maya gave her as she returned from the jet bridge. Not smug, not angry, just disappointed. You had a chance, Maya said softly, and you failed to see what was right in front of you. Lauren didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Caleb deplaned last. As he stepped into the terminal, he looked once more toward the private lounge. He didn't speak to Clara, didn't approach, but he stood still for a moment, watching. Sometimes witnessing was enough. For now, the press conference room was a bright space filled with the low murmur of cameras clicking and microphones adjusting. Reporters whispered to one another while producers checked notes and executives scanned social media feeds on their phones. Aurora Skies Airlines was preparing for one of its most important moments in years. Clara Jennings sat near the front of the room, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The room had changed since she last attended a corporate event here. Back then, she was mostly unseen, a silent investor, a quiet partner. Today, she was a force. She wasn't wearing the bright colors of a CEO or the flash of a public figure. Instead, she was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, the subtle gold earrings catching the light every time she moved. Her hair was pulled back into a low bun, dignified and timeless, when the Aurora Skies CEO, Richard Daly, stepped up to the podium. The room quieted instantly. His face was tight with nervous energy. The scandal had rattled the company deeply, but Clara was the one holding the cards now. Good morning, Daly began, clearing his throat. I want to thank all of you for being here today. We have been through a difficult situation with one of our valued passengers, Ms. Clara Jennings. I want to personally apologize for the mistreatment she received during her recent flight. Clara listened but said nothing. The apology was a start, but it wasn't nearly enough. Daly continued. We are launching an internal investigation and immediate staff training to ensure this never happens again. The murmurs rippled through the room. Daly glanced down at a note, then looked up. Additionally, I want to announce that effective today, Ms. Jennings has purchased a controlling interest in Aurora Skies Airlines. A collective gasp rose from the press. Cameras zoomed in on Clara's composed face. Daly gestured toward her. She has been a silent investor for years, but after the events of the recent flight, she decided to step forward to lead the company toward a new era of inclusion and respect. Clara rose slowly. The room hushed. She approached the podium with quiet confidence. Thank you, Richard, she said, voice steady. She paused to let her words settle. I have spent much of my life teaching others the power of dignity and resilience. Today, I am here to do the same for this company. She looked around, meeting the eyes of reporters, executives, and employees alike. Aurora Skies was founded on principles of equality and progress. somewhere along the way, those principles became words on paper rather than lived values. She straightened, tone firm but compassionate. My goal is not to punish, but to transform, to ensure that no passenger or employee ever feels unseen or unworthy because of their skin, their age, or their background. A reporter raised a hand. Ms. Jennings, can you share what motivated your decision to purchase the airline? Clara smiled softly. I have always believed in investing quietly in potential. When I was wrongfully displaced from my seat, I realized that potential needed direction. The airline needed someone who would put values before profits, people before politics. The room filled with a sense of gravity. This was more than a business move. It was a commitment to justice. Daly nodded beside her. Clara's leadership marks a turning point for Aurora Skies. We welcome her vision and her dedication. After the conference, Clara was surrounded by staff and well-wishers. Maya Chen approached, tears shining in her eyes. Thank you for giving us a chance to make this right, Maya said. Clara smiled warmly. You are a part of the change, too. Maya, never forget that. Later, Caleb Monroe arrived to congratulate her. He had watched from the sidelines, his own dreams ignited by her courage. Ms. Jennings, he said with genuine respect, you've given so many of us hope. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder, and hope is only the beginning. That night, Clara sat alone in her new office overlooking the city skyline. The lights below twinkled like stars, reminders that even in darkness, there is light. She pulled out a framed photo from her bag, a picture of her and Jeremiah on their first anniversary trip to Paris. She smiled softly and placed it on her desk. Her phone buzzed, a message from Maya, ready for the first training session. Clara typed back, let's begin the work that matters. As the city pulsed with life beneath her, Clara knew that this was not an end. It was a beginning. Aurora belonged to the skies again, and so did dignity. Months had passed since Clara Jennings took control of Aurora Skies Airlines. The company was in the midst of transformation, but the most profound change was happening quietly, far from the glare of corporate offices and media spotlights. In a modest community center in a neighborhood east of Boston, Caleb Monroe stood before a small group of teenagers. The walls were lined with posters reading "Dream Big," "Your Voice Matters," and "Dignity is Power." Caleb held a folded card in his hand, the one Clara had given him months ago, when they first spoke on that flight. "Welcome to the Jennings Initiative," he said, voice steady but charged with meaning. "This is more than a program. It's a movement, a place where dignity isn't just a word but a practice. And it all started because one woman refused to be invisible." The room was filled with attentive faces, young people hungry for opportunity and hope. Meanwhile, miles away in a sunlit office at Aurora's headquarters, Clara sat at her desk, reviewing reports on staff training completion rates and passenger feedback. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, a candle flickering softly beside her. She glanced at a photo on her desk, a younger Clara and Jeremiah on a boat, laughing against the golden light of a sunset. Her phone buzzed. A message from Caleb appeared. First session was a success. Thank you. She smiled. Clara knew that real change took time. It was built on countless small moments, one conversation, one act of courage, one decision to stand firm. She thought back to the flight where it all began. The moment Lauren Strickland had looked at her and decided she didn't belong. The way Maya Chen had struggled with loyalty and conscience, the courage of Caleb Monroe, a young man who saw the injustice and refused to be silent. And now, that moment had rippled outward, changing lives. Clara leaned back, eyes closing briefly. Inside, a quiet war had been fought and won, not with noise or anger, but with steadfast grace. There was still much to do, policies to rewrite, culture to shift, histories to reckon with. But Clara was no stranger to battles. She opened her journal, its pages filled with reflections, plans, and stories of resilience. Her pen moved across the paper, crafting words meant for the next chapter. "I never wanted to be the face of this fight," she wrote, "but sometimes the fight chooses you." Later that afternoon, Clara received a call from Maya. Her voice was warm, excited. "Miss Jennings, the new training modules have been met with enthusiasm. The staff are engaging in conversations they never had before." Clara's heart lifted. "That's progress. It's more than that." Maya replied, "It's hope." Caleb's foundation grew steadily. The Jennings Initiative had partnered with local schools, offering workshops on dignity, equity, and self-advocacy. Teenagers who had once felt powerless now spoke with confidence. Parents expressed gratitude. The community began to shift. One evening, Clara received a letter from a former student. "Thank you for showing me how to stand tall." It read, "Because of you, I believe in my own worth." Clara kept the letter beside her bed. It was a reminder that the quietest voices often carried the most power. But the journey was not without pain. Lauren Strickland's suspension had been followed by a company-wide reflection. Aurora Skies issued a public apology, retrained all cabin crew, and created new channels for passengers to report discrimination safely. Yet Clara understood that changing hearts was harder than changing policies. She thought often of Lauren not with anger, but with a cautious hope. Change could be slow, messy, sometimes painful, but it was necessary. One morning, as Clara walked through the headquarters, she encountered Caleb. He looked up from his phone and smiled. "Ms. Jennings, you've changed more than an airline," he said quietly. "You've changed me." Clara reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And you've changed a community," she replied. Together, they walked into the light-filled atrium, ready to continue the work ahead, because dignity was not a destination. It was a journey, and they were just beginning. The morning sun spilled through the expansive windows of Aurora Skies Airlines' newly renovated headquarters. Light danced across polished floors and brushed softly against walls adorned with images of the airline's history moments of innovation, diversity, and perseverance. The air was alive with the quiet buzz of renewed purpose. Clara Jennings stood near the entrance, her silhouette framed by the golden glow. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, her hair gathered neatly at the nape of her neck. Her eyes carried the calm certainty of a woman who had weathered storms and now guided others through calm seas. Today was the day the airline would launch its new community board, a group of voices representing passengers, employees, and leaders committed to shaping a future of true inclusion. Maya Chen approached, carrying a folder filled with the first quarterly reports from the revamped training programs. "The response has been overwhelmingly positive," she said, smiling. "Staff are engaged, and passengers have noticed the change." Clara nodded, her thoughts drifting back to the flight where it all began, a flight that had revealed deep fault lines but also immense strength. Change is never easy, Clara said softly, but it is always worth it. Outside, children from a local school gathered for a ribbon-cutting ceremony inaugurating the Jennings Initiative's newest learning center. Banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, and laughter mingled with the soft chatter of proud families. Caleb Monroe stood among them, now a confident young man dedicated to carrying forward the message of dignity and respect. His foundation had grown from a seedling of hope into a flourishing beacon for the community. As Clara stepped onto the rooftop terrace of the headquarters, she gazed out over the city, a sprawling mosaic of lives intersecting in countless ways. She thought of Jeremiah, her late husband, and the promise they had made to each other long ago to leave the world better than they found it. In that moment, Clara felt the weight of that promise fulfilled. Her phone buzzed, a message from Maya, ready for the next chapter. Clara smiled and typed back, "Let's keep rewriting the wings." She looked up at the sky, where the first Aurora Skies flight of the day ascended, cutting through clouds that now seemed lighter, brighter. The sky belonged to everyone, and under her leadership, Aurora Skies Airlines would ensure that everyone soared with dignity. Clara Jennings' story reminds us that beneath every act of discrimination lies a deep wound, one that scars individuals and communities alike. Yet, her quiet dignity and unwavering strength show us that even in the face of injustice, grace and resilience can ignite change. This story challenges us to confront our own biases and to remember that respect is not a privilege. It is a right everyone deserves. The airline's transformation, born from one woman's refusal to be invisible, serves as a powerful call to action, to stand up, to speak out, and to demand a world where no one is denied their rightful place because of who they are. Thank you for joining us in witnessing Clara's journey. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that shine a light on truth, justice, and human dignity. Together, we can inspire change one story at a time. Stay tuned for our next video. You won't want to miss what's coming next.